my friend and former student Steve Van Rokel finally was able to arrange to come. When you try to bring someone where the White House scheduling office has to make the arrangement, it's always a tremendous adventure because there are conflicts and security issues and briefings and all kinds of things. So we're really thrilled and delighted that he was able to come and share with us his experience. You know some of the background. I'm going to turn this over to Associate Provost Dr. Holger in a minute, and he'll remind you of a few of the highlights of Steve Van Rokel's background. I'm just glad to see him again. And I guess I wanted to also say that the bullet light that you helped me install over the kitchen sink at my farm, it's still working great. So you were always really into electrical things, and I'm glad to see that you still are. So, Dr. Holger?
Thank you, Stefan, and welcome everyone to this special lecture that's part of the National Affairs series. It's my pleasure to welcome Stephen Van Rokel to Iowa State. I'm speaking on behalf of President Leith and Executive Vice President and Provost Hoffman that we're delighted you're able to be with us today. Stephen Van Rokel is the second CIO of the United States and an Iowa State alumnus. He's the first CIO of the United States to come to our campus to address us. So all kinds of firsts today. Prior to his position in the White House, he held two positions in the Obama administration. He was Executive Director of Citizen and Organizational Engagement at USAID, and for a longer period, he was Managing Director of the Federal Communications Commission, where he oversaw operational, technical, financial, and human resource aspects of the agency. And by visiting with him earlier today, it sounds like he sort of brought that agency a little bit closer to the 20th century. He also led their efforts to introduce new technology and social media into the agency, which moved them forward even further. Prior to that, he was employed at Microsoft Corporation from 1994 to 2009, and most recently during that time, he served as Senior Director in the Windows Server and Tools Division of Microsoft. He received a bachelor's degree in Management of Information Systems from Iowa State, and we're delighted he's back with us today. And I was pleased to learn earlier that he actually reacquired recently and now owns what I believe is an operational Apple IIe. So welcome, Stephen.
Well, thanks to everybody for coming out. This is a beautiful day. I would love to move this out to the grass and next to the Campanile, or if I had my way, maybe down to the maintenance shop, and we'd all get beers or something down there, just for old time's sake for me. It's great to be back on campus and great to be back in Iowa. My parents are actually in the audience today, and I think the only time they've seen me speak publicly was at my wedding, where I made a toast, and so hopefully I don't disappoint on that front either. I came to Iowa State straight out of high school. I grew up in Northwest Iowa in Cherokee. When I was in about 7th or 8th grade is when the Apple IIe came out, and I was just enthralled with that device. I was put in a program in the 8th grade where we had after school access to the Apple IIe, and I think we had a semester worth of certifications that we had to complete to get that done. And if you look at my little certification cards, they almost fall on sequential days that I just got so into this thing that I just poured myself into it. And I left Cherokee to come to Iowa State initially as an aerospace engineering major. And at that time, in the late 80s. We were kind of coming off the Reagan presidency, and a lot was happening from the standpoint of national defense and investment in aerospace. And much like I imagine many of you have heard, off and on from your classmates and others, you pay close attention to what's going on in the industry at the time for your job prospects and things as you're going out. And the funny thing and the funny phenomenon, throughout high school and into my early college time was that computer science definitely was a career. I mean, the computer was invented, not far from where we're sitting right now, but it wasn't personal computing, and the information economy that we now sort of take for granted wasn't a career. The professors here on campus were still teaching sort of the mainframe languages, COBOL and Pascal and Fortran, and we'd go over to the computer lab to write our apps on old VAX terminals and connect back to the mainframe and do that work. And by about midpoint of my academic career, suddenly the lights started to shine around the industry, and we started to see some things happening. And I'll kind of jump to that. I'll pick that point up in a second as I go forward here. But it's as I went through my private sector career and then went to government, and I'll tell that story, then I'll go back to where we were, kind of picking up the other story. Coming into government was kind of an amazing thing. First, after spending 15 plus years at Microsoft, I'd never thought I would go to public service. I didn't really knew what that meant. I was an Obama supporter before the caucuses here in Iowa and throughout the 2008 election. And when the inauguration happened, I went out with my wife and 3 million of my friends to celebrate and hang out in D.C. for a few days. I went out to lunch with a friend. He was an editor of a major magazine in D.C. and was married to a woman who was the first female vice president at Microsoft and happened to run the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle. And so I went to lunch with my friend Mike and told Mike that I was sort of at this soul-searching moment for me. I had been at Microsoft a long time. Part of my career at Microsoft was as Bill Gates' assistant, doing technical and business strategy and helping him with speeches and helping launch the Gates Foundation into World Health and that focus. And Bill had left, if you remember, in the summer of 2008 to pursue his work at the foundation full time. And so I was sort of looking at my career and saying, I've kind of done everything I wanted to do at this company. I want to move on to do my next thing. And so I told this friend I was soul searching and thinking about what I would do next, really thinking in the context of the Pacific Northwest, given that's where we had lived and had 2 of our children there. And Mike turned to me and just said, you got to join public service. You've been a supporter. You got to live this change you've been spouting to all of us on email for the last 6 months, and join the team. And I literally, out of completely naive, said, I have no idea how to do that. Do I mail my governor? Do I call somebody? Or how do you get into that system? It just seems so impossible. About 30 minutes after the lunch, my cell phone rang, and it was the transition team. And I found myself that afternoon, about 4 or 5 hours later, in the transition building, which is where the president-elect starts his job before his inauguration. And he was right down the hall. And I met with some people that said, they would like me to join the team. Me not knowing how my skills in IT and business and other things could be applicable, I found that it's pretty applicable. But the government I found at the time, this chasm shot on the slide reminds me of sort of where we were. The delta between the difference from what I experienced in the private sector, the pace of innovation, the sort of investment and budgeting models and all that, was much different than what you were seeing in the public sector. The private sector was much faster, public sector slow. There's a big productivity gap in the use of technology in the private and public sector. There was quite a difference there. Talent management and people and getting young people to join the ranks. There was quite a divide there as well. And so we had a big task to kind of bridge between those two. And think about that. Plus, we're just faced with a lot of challenges as a country in 2009, as you know, coming off or in the midst of a pretty bad economic downturn and other things. But this is where I'll go back to Iowa, and the story kind of picks back up when I was in middle school and a lot of this. And I remember vividly back then, coming off, we had a big similar very large recession in the 1970s, I remember vividly hearing stories about how America's best days were behind us. You know, that we had peaked as a country, that we were destined to be a services economy, that we were you know, going to be the society of burger flippers and management consultants, and all the innovation was happening elsewhere. In those days, I just remember seeing on TV, you know, videos of Japanese workers like doing workouts before work and talking about all the amazing quality control and all the innovation. And trust me, there was a lot of innovation coming from Sony and Honda and other companies there, based largely on their management practices and quality control measures and a lot of the technology that they were using to get this done. But there was this sort of quiet phenomenon happening in the 80s as well. I think the government, in partnership with the private sector, were doing a lot of things in concert as well with the academic community on funding research and development, you know, standing up ARPANET, the precursor to the internet, to you know, wisely placing grants in different places to foster new technology. If you look at research companies like Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center, and other places like that, there was just this sort of growing entrepreneurial spirit happening in our society that gave rise to the personal computing phenomenon. So that's where my cross-section happened when I sort of showed up. When I showed up at the doors of Iowa State, I sort of got this fun picture taken of me opening my first computer on some either birthday or Christmas morning, I forget. Not very far from here in Northwest Iowa. It's a Commodore 64 for any of you history buffs out there. And I, according to my mother, who will verify this if you go ask her personally, I spent hours and hours and many evenings in my room with the door shut programming this thing. When I first got it, it actually didn't have a hard drive, so you had to turn it on, program the heck out of it, hope you didn't have a power outage in your house because you'd lose all your work, and then run your program. And then when it started something new, you would shut it off and turn it back on and start from scratch again. It was pretty fun stuff. And eventually I got the cassette drive that I could use to move that forward. But this sort of started to happen, and what ended up happening is the U.S. took a leadership role. We were the country to be envied on information technology and technology generally. You kind of all know the end of the story. The internet was born. The explosion happened in the mid-90s with the internet. We now have a new way of learning, a new way of doing business, a new way of everything created by this phenomenon. And the question is, are we in that same situation? You know, are our best days behind us? Are we in a services economy? Is innovation only going to happen outside the walls of this country? And I think we have to ask those questions and see what we're doing to get there. So one of the things, I'll quickly describe what I do before I kind of get into discussing kind of some of the nuances of this, what I do in my job. So the president appointed me last August as the second chief information officer, and in that role, I have both a statutory role. Part of my job was created by Congress, and then I have an advisor to the president, assistant to the president role that I play as the chief information officer. The statutory side of my job is all about the way the government uses technology. So I control the IT spend of the federal government. It's about $80 billion a year that we spend on information technology. And with that is not only just sort of, handling the spreadsheet of where money is going, but also thinking very strategically about how we spend that. What are ways that we can invest wisely to foster good things? And the second part of my job as assistant to the president is as an advisor, a technical resource in the White House, as a person that's going to advise on technical policy or on really any policy. The amazing thing is that technology is in everything in front of us right now. And so I get very involved in lots of stuff coming forward on how we're going to implement healthcare in this country, how we're going to think about education, how we're going to think about lots of other things, all have a technology component. And so I get involved in some of those, some deep, some shallow, but involved in all those things. The other thing we're really careful about, and I think a lot about, is that an $80 billion spend, you actually have a market effect. You can actually affect the U.S. marketplace by by that spend amount. And so we think a lot about the way we invest in technology, what we buy, how we buy it, in a way that can foster American business, that can drive innovation, that can do other things. So like in the case of cloud computing, it's not just ordering agencies to go out and acquire cloud resources. It's thinking about how do we standardize security, cybersecurity for cloud resources so that when we acquire them, we create a better landscape for the country in cybersecurity around cloud. Or how do we think about international aspects of that stuff to make American companies more competitive worldwide in the way we do that. So we focus on a lot of those things. One of the things, I was an MIS major, so I have kind of equally the business and computer science part. So I'm going to start on the business side and talk about the difference of delivering value in the private sector and public sector. It's sort of it was one of the notions that took me a little while to decipher, but it's a super important one, explaining really what's going on in the way we use technology. And that is in the private sector, if you're thinking about delivering value, so you're building a product, you're updating some software that you've written, you're doing something along the lines of just delivering some result, some valuable result you hope is valuable to your company. You have in the pie of sort of the things you do to deliver value, you have part of the pie which is sort of the operation and maintenance of the stuff you've already done. I've shipped version 1. I've got to sort of maintain that in the marketplace. I've got to support it. I've got to patch it. I've got to do other things while I build version 2 and deliver that to the marketplace. And I have to balance my resources across sort of what I've done in the past and what I'm going to do in the future. That exists in the government as well. We have lots of old systems that we support and do things around. So we take care of lots of old systems. In both of them, you also have new delivery. You have the new stuff you're going to do. I'm working on version 2. I'm updating this. In government, we have new delivery as well. There's new things we do all the time. I'm updating the online tax filing system. So when you file your taxes electronically, that just works better. Or so we just recently shipped the ability to file for a passport digitally online versus having to print the thing out and carry it in and things like that. So we're always doing new things in government, both on the citizen side and inside the walls of government. The difference is there's one more pie slice that exists in the private sector that doesn't exist in the public sector, and that's the depreciation pie slice. So depreciation is used as both a financial tool, saying I'm going to wind down this investment over time and I'm going to sort of write it off the books, and it's used as a cultural tool to basically say I'm going to wind down the things I've done in the past. And it is the management of the pie slices, allocations of the pie slices that you do as a business leader to manage your business. Hopefully you're making those decisions wisely and you sort of move pieces around. I'm going to kill this thing I used to do and I'm going to put that into, I'm either depreciate it or I'm going to kill it outright and put it into new service delivery, and I'm going to hopefully grow my pie so it just grows bigger and bigger over time as my profits grow and my costs are contained, and you sort of grow the pie up. And those arrows on that slide represent sort of the pure essence of risk, right? I'm taking risks. I'm gonna take a risk by killing something. I'm gonna move it into some new allocation. I'm gonna do this. When I ran the server and tools division at Microsoft, we did this all the time. We had quarterly reporting. I thought about shareholder value. We were about a third of the company's balance sheet, and so we had to do this stuff all the time. Of when do we do this? Should we incubate a new project, or should we supplement one we've done in the past? So you make those decisions. You allocate the pie, and these pie slices are different sizes based on if you're in growth mode versus sort of sustain mode for your business and all that. The problem is public sector really only has 2 pie slices: the old stuff and new delivery, and you can't really, we don't have depreciation as a financial tool, nor is it a cultural tool. That's why, there's so much old stuff still running in government, that we don't wind it down. We sort of wrap our arms around it and just drive from there. That's why those COBOL classes I took not very far from here are so valuable to me now, because I can still use that knowledge in the federal government because it's still running in a lot of places. But why has that not been a big impact? Because we've certainly done new things. Well, if you look at federal IT spending over the last, this goes back to 2001, but even before that, the trend holds true. We were at about a 7% compound annual growth rate. So our pie grew based on the growth rate of the budget, about 7% a year. So we were able to do new delivery without depreciating things because we could just grow the pie bigger through raising the budget numbers. We just spent more on technology year over year. And if you look at federal spending, it kind of follows some of that similar trend. But this is only focused on technology in those times. In 2009, when President Obama came on board and my team was brought forward, we stopped that. We flatlined federal IT spending, and actually it's roughly flat, negative 0.004 compound annual growth rate. If you adjust for inflation, it's actually about a 4% growth over the last 10 or 15 years, and about a negative 2% on growth. So we flatlined it. So that puts a lot of pressure on federal IT in the standpoint of my pie's not growing. It's going to shrink. And what ends up happening, if we had kept going, we'd be at about 104 billion right now versus 80 billion, which we are. What ends up happening is, if you look at the public sector part of the pie, is that we just eat into new delivery. We just the hanging on to the old stuff just ends up chewing into new delivery, and the government doesn't have the ability to do new things. And so my job is really big part of my job is figuring out, how do you cut from the old, bring to the new? How do you shock the system to establish a culture of depreciation that you need to wind down the old? How do you in a very, very, very risk tolerant environment create risk or inspire risk, smart risk, to make the right risk, to go out and do the right thing? The other question we often ask ourselves is are we ready as a government? This picture, I think, captures largely what I saw on the West Coast when I left the private sector, but also I imagine what you see in every cafeteria in this building, or every area where students are sitting around studying. It probably looks a lot like that, which is there's a new way of working. There's a new way of doing things. And I think we all kind of knew that pressure was coming, because there always were those youngsters. That's my 2-year-old using my iPad. I took that 2 days ago. There are always those youngsters that we always knew, like many of you, the students in this room, kind of grew up online your entire life. I think what we hadn't anticipated as a country and a government was the impact of social media and what that brought to bear on the other segments of the population beyond the sort of natives of the digital world. And that is, you now have grandparents going on Facebook and embarrassing your grandkids by posting crazy things, and that those same people are now expecting a different interaction. They're getting used to a different interaction model than what we'll see in the future, than what we've seen in the past and will see in the future. And when that same person, that same grandparent, needs to go get something with the Social Security Administration, they want to go to a website, print out a form, fill it out, hand it, go into an office, pull a sticker off a wall, wait an hour and a half, and hand it to someone to type it in again for them, which is the way it used to happen at Social Security offices. They want to just do it online, just log in and go to town on the form, submit it in real time, much like they got used to doing it in on Amazon.com, Expedia, different places like that. And so we view it as our job, and the president is very much creating this role and sort of inspiring these functions is really about, how do we foster that for the U.S. government? How do we bring that forward and drive that phenomenon forward is part of the mix. So some of the other pressures that are kind of acting on federal technology, one of the biggest, I think, is of course cybersecurity. It's an ever-present pressure. A lot of my work deals with thinking about cyber and how we shore up the country's infrastructure around cybersecurity and think about that. Another is, of course, the fiscal pressure. I talked about that. The Facebook nation is the impact of social media. The culture of government, risk aversion, and the reliance on sunk costs, putting your arms around, that's the way I've always done it. Don't make me do it differently. That's very prevalent in government. There's also a kind of the culture of sense of ownership. I think you probably end up seeing this in the university environment as well, department to department or things like that, where you have, people just want to do it themselves. They want to go and implement some technology on their own because it's something they know, something they're familiar with, something they want to drive. Well, it doesn't tend to be the most efficient way of driving technology. in the federal government, that sort of exploded with the growth of technology. That's why you had even agencies of government like the Department of Agriculture had 21 email systems, separate email systems inside the department, when it would be unthinkable from the private sector to have more than one. They're now at one email system. And went from 21 to 1. It's cloud-based, and it's a third the cost, and it's a great benefit there. Same department went from over 1,000 mobile contracts down to 3. Massive, like hundreds of millions of dollars of savings, as you can imagine, given the scale of the U.S. federal government. So we have lots of opportunities to kind of break through, but in any organization and anything, when all of you go out and find your first major job and go through, you'll find that culture transformation is always the hardest thing. It's evolving that culture. And so you often have to do things to sort of shock the system and bring new things to bear. And especially given, I think, where all of you students have kind of come up, and the way you learn, the way you work, the way you do different things, it's going to be a different model. There will be a cultural difference, I think, between many of the people you maybe work with in the future. And so you want to think about that. How do you sort of inspire culture change in a productive way? And then the other pressure, of course, is U.S. leadership. Thinking about, are we doing the right things from a federal government standpoint to make us the leader in the world? Are we the most competitive? Are we doing things? And so my job is basically sort of this fancy Venn diagram. Looks like a multi-cell or a single-cell organism, I know. The first one is really on maximizing the ROI of federal IT. How do we get the most return on investment and innovate with less? So a lot of what we do is, a lot of my tactical aspects are, because we're on a flat budget, I'm not getting new money to go do new things. So we can either turn and just spend on the things we always did, or we have to find mechanisms to just maniacally go out and cut waste, cut duplication, cut things that aren't working, and use those cuts to create the capital expenditure to then fund new innovation. And so that's definitely what we're doing there. The second is around productivity gap in 21st century government. How do we use the inflection point we all find ourselves in with the consumerization of technology, the computer in your pocket with an iPhone or things like that, to bring that to bear on the federal government as one example of many. Collaboration-based software, social networking, all that stuff can pay dividends, I think, in the way we work in the federal government. No longer do I think we need to go to a separate office for every department in every city in this country when citizens can carry around all federal agencies in their pocket on a smart device. And so it's how do we transform agencies to do that and embrace the 21st century. Business and citizen interaction and national priorities. This is one the president is very excited about, that we're taking this job of overlooking federal IT and also focusing our efforts on how do we deliver value to Americans and American businesses and American citizens. Can we use these inflection points we find ourselves, these investments we're making in updating systems, of moving to cloud computing, to do other things, to also make business and citizen interaction better for the country? One of the examples I use here is when I showed up on the job, if you were a small business and wanted to export a product, you have to work with 7 to 8 agencies of government to get that done. And that's kind of insurmountable for most small businesses to be able to do. So we put forth an effort, worked with the president to launch Business USA, which is business.usa.gov, which is one place that now all these agencies sort of report through, and they create basically one avenue for American businesses, especially small businesses who want to export, to get into the federal system, to understand how to navigate the quagmire that is all these agencies. We've also established a call center. There's 1-800-FED-INFO. If you want to export a product, call that, and they'll help you navigate. We're training all the SBA field offices, Small Business Administration field offices, and small business associations around the country and things like that as part of this effort. And the coolest thing that came out of this is the president actually looked at it and said, all these agencies should really just be one. We shouldn't have this dozen or so, agencies that do trade and export and commerce. And so we put forth legislative language that actually says, let's reorganize them all into one agency. And so that's up on the Hill in Congress right now and for consideration. So kind of fun. You think that IT policy can actually lead to this kind of systematic change in government, which is pretty cool. Cybersecurity, of course, is the part of the Venn diagram that's around everything, as well as really driving new modes of investment, governance, and delivery, breaking down the walls in the way we deliver and the way we fund and the way we deliver technology in government. The bottom line, though, is oftentimes, and any of you are aspiring CIOs or in a CIO function where you are today, the thing you have to remember, and the thing I always try to remind CIOs in government, this is why my private sector experience and being grounded in an MIS degree that strikes that careful balance between business and technology, is that at the end of the day, it's always about the mission. It's not about the email servers. It's not about the database. It's not about the infrastructure, the network. It's about getting the mission done. Are we serving Americans through our work in a better way? Are we making the experience of government more efficient? Are we serving national priorities in the work we do? And so, as you go out, if you're in any technical field or you're an MIS major, computer science, anything, just remember your interactions always need to be about the end result, the objective, what you're going to go drive, and work your way back from that. The technology can come later. It's about delivering on the mission. This is a photo of a Air Force pilot. I was at when I went to Consumer Electronics Show. I had the honor of going up to Nellis Air Force Base, just north of Las Vegas, and touring around there. And they're doing these cool pilots around devices, smart devices, and how they're using those in the mission, literally the mission on that case. So when I showed you the chasm earlier, and I talk about sort of shocking the system and how do you do things in a different way. We have to. A big part of the job is putting big initiatives forward to bridge that gap, bridge that chasm. How do you bring private sector sort of thinking into government? How do you build things in a different way? How do you get duplication and foster the next government for that Facebook nation, the social media users out there, the people like you that are going to come online and interact with government more and more all the time? We think a lot about those things we have to do to kind of bridge that gap. On the left side, some of the stuff that I've done is optimizing federal data centers. We have over 3,000 data centers in the U.S. In my portfolio, and so I have a very aggressive goal of closing 40% of them and optimizing the rest into delivering even better service. That will save us in the out years about $5 to $6 billion by closing those 40%. So that's going to give us a lot of that investment capital to kind of pour back into technology. I use the Federal Register as the background. We also stopped the printing of the Federal Register. That's now all online. It's no more paper doorstops. It makes a great monitor stand. I will give you that. I do a pile of them as monitor stand. We launched an initiative called the IT Dashboard. This is actually, you can get to it, itdashboard.gov. There's the president using it there. And it basically has it's a mechanism. Part of my job, I think, is sort of as I talked about, careful balance, striking the careful balance between inspire and push. On the Inspire side, I go out and talk to agencies and government about the art of the possible, what we can do, way mobile kind of impacts. I show them lots of pictures of young people like you doing work that I'm trying to get everybody else to do. And then it's on the push side, it's building great policy, putting out policy for the government to follow, or building mechanisms that inspire accountability. Unlike the private sector, we don't have financial incentives. We don't have other things to sort of, use as motivators. So we sort of, talk about patriotism, and we build mechanisms to hold people accountable. IT Dashboard is just that. So you can actually go in and look at the department level, what they're spending on, how they're spending it. And we use it as a management tool. It wasn't really intended for a public tool, but it's great that it is public, because if you're interested in anything, you can go look at it. But largely, we use it as a management tool to basically hold agencies accountable for the way they're investing in technology. And it's a great visualizations and things like that. And that's been a super big success. And then the other process that we started is called TechStats. And this is basically a very prescribed method of going in and looking at troubled investments across the federal footprint. So we send sort of a SWAT team in and sit down with agencies and sort of look at these investments that they've done and either try to turn them around, redefine them, bring new resources in to complete them, or terminate them. And in the Obama administration, since we've had TechStats, we've saved over $4 billion through this process, which is great. We're just going in and doing lots of important work. It sort of shows you the power of the laser, if you will, instead of the shotgun on, shotgun sort of the policy level. Laser is kind of going in and looking at this all up. The next motion you're going to see here is just last Friday, I launched a new effort called Portfolio Stat, which is a complement to this that will look across. It basically orders all agencies to report up their entire IT portfolio in a way that we're going to root out duplication and other things. I was able to find the 21 email systems at USDA and the 1,000 mobile contracts there because of a great relationship with the CIO. This Portfolio Stat's going to give me visibility across the entire federal portfolio. So we're just going to go in and create massive investment capital, some savings to go back to deficit, but massive investment capital to re-innovate in government. So we'll have that happening soon. We're also doing a lot of work on open data and open government, focusing on how do we transform all this data that's locked up inside the federal systems. It's amazing how much data the federal government contains and has available. We launched data.gov. If you haven't seen it, it's a pretty cool platform, web services, machine readable, all that stuff. There's 400,000 data sets up there that the government has uploaded. In the coming months, you're going to see a new kind of a new evolution of that platform that takes it in a direction of really allowing developers to connect to federal data in a new way. And so expect more there, and you'll see me announcing some things around that to really kind of foster the innovation economy based on government data. And I'll give you a couple fun examples of that. One is, I think one of the areas we've done a good job is around health data, healthcare data. If you go to health.data.gov, you can check out the health data we've put up there. We did a developer day hackathon in DC where we brought developers in, focused on the healthcare field to do development. And we had sort of some big companies there and some little startups there. 3 of the little startups who showed up with innovative solutions based on government data were acquired by the big companies during our hackathon. And so as a product of our hackathon. So it just shows the power of some of this data to do things. The other example I use is I launched a effort while at the FCC called broadbandmap.gov that lists the broadband capabilities, pricing, speed, all that stuff of the entire United States. And so there's a list. You can actually go down to your street and look at what broadband's available, things like that. Pretty interesting, especially when you overlay it with demographic data. We've got census data up there, and you can look at different trends. And if is it hold true that broadband kind of follows economic lines? It is true. And look at that. But that really gets interesting when you overlay it with like education data and other data. And so that's now happening where broadband infrastructure as a key element of analysis against other data sets is pretty amazing and powerful. The other thing that I'm excited about is I think by the end of this year, you'll start to see real estate websites in this country start to broadcast or publish broadband capabilities of house listings. So you can think if you're going to look at a new apartment in town, or you're looking at, maybe buying your first house or a new house, probably like me, you care more about the broadband capabilities than you care about the roof composition. And so getting people to know that, I think, is a good thing. And so doing that, I think there's also something to be said about the future of media here too, and thinking about local news and how do we sort of foster in sort of local news. We've seen a bit of a departure of local news because of the economics and the impact of the internet. I think this is one place where the internet can actually supplement and help from a local news standpoint. If we start to standardize data, if we start to make it machine readable, where application and news aggregators can be written to really consume it in intelligent ways, I think we could really give rise to a new era of local media in a way that we haven't done in the past. We know the federal government knows a lot about this part of Iowa, for example, just from agriculture data, census data, economic data, education data, all that sort of stuff. You can start to paint pictures if you start combining that data and garnering knowledge from it. Today, much of it is locked up in PDF files and paper and other things. So it's really about kind of transforming data and thinking about that. I talked a little bit about consumerization and the mobile impact. We're thinking a lot in government how this can impact. Should we seize on this mobile opportunity to change the way we deliver applications, the way we do things? And I think the answer is yes. And you'll see some stuff coming out from me on that. And then the other thing is some people things. We know, to really change culture, you inject new people into the system. 60% of the federal IT workforce is up for retirement now and are not retiring. So we have an opportunity there as we churn through retirement and new inflection points to really seize on the people change part of this. Part of this is something I would encourage all of you to look at is the Presidential Technology Fellows Program. I launched in last October. We have something called the Presidential Management Fellows Program right now, which is a program that allows you to apply, postgraduate apply, to work in the federal government. You get put into a pool, and through the selection process, we vet through and select candidates out of the pool to be put in a central pool from which the government can just directly hire. And besides the prestige of being a presidential management fellow for the U.S. government, it also allows every 6-month rotations to different agencies, a job after a year, and mentorship and speaker series with important people, and things like that. It's a pretty cool program, and the people that I've hired out of PMF have been just incredible employees. But what I noticed looking at the PMF program and other things like it was there was no focus on technology or IT. Typically PMF people were poli-sci or legal majors. And so I started up the Presidential Technologies Fellows Program as an adjunct to the PMF program. So it allows you all the benefits of a PMF program, but it preferences people with IT skills, developer skills, design skills, anything that's social media skills, anything that kind of falls into those categories. We opened up our first batch of these in October. We had 5,000 people apply, 5,000 students apply at the top level, and this spring the system is working its way through to vet down to who the selected group that can be hired, and we can start hiring as a government from them this spring. So it's open every fall, about the October timeframe. So if you go to cio.gov and search on Presidential Technology Fellows, you'll find information on it. There's a page up there, how to apply, put a reminder on your calendar when the next window is going to be open, and I encourage all of you to try that. White House internships are also great too. The deadline for the fall closed last night at midnight, so sorry about that. But the one for next spring will be open pretty soon, so I encourage you to kind of pay attention. It's an amazing opportunity, as you can imagine, to get out there. The other thing is we've fired up an effort around entrepreneurs in residence, rotating in a non-conflicted way private sector people into government to work on projects, both culture change projects, but also meaningful projects. So it'd be, someone from, say, Duncan Hines or Procter & Gamble, who knows process reengineering, to come into the Food and Drug Administration to think about medical device applications and things like that. It's sort of that level where it's you avoid conflict, but you get people in that have expertise. So we've actually piloted this in a few agencies and plan to scale it in 2012, where we're doing more of this. My dream come true here is that I actually get federal employees to rotate out for like 6 months into the private sector, while the private sector person is rotating into public, and kind of create a nice cycle there of training and things. So I mentioned the outside looking in perspective of citizen and business interaction. The center of gravity here for us is USA.gov. It's creating thinking about our .gov footprint and how many websites we have. Right now we have about 1,700 .gov websites in the federal government, way more than any person can navigate. And even the problem's not even solved by the Googles and the Bings and others of the world. It's still way too confusing. And so we're putting forth an effort to have an outside looking in perspective and start to clean some of this up, and think about that. Some of the areas where we've delivered on that consolidation, I mentioned Business USA. The president also has us working on a project around job training. We're rebranding a bunch of stuff around American Job Centers. If you go to jobcenter.usa.gov, you can see there's a place where you can sign up to find more information about that. And then also I've been working on a project around infrastructure permitting. That picture was actually at my launch event for businessusa.gov, and it basically shows all the, it's color coded for agencies, I think are green, Call centers are like magenta at the bottom. Websites are the light blue on the upper left, and all that stuff of people that have to navigate to do exporting in this country. That's the mess they're having to go to around certain categories of stuff. With Business USA, it's one website, one call center, one agency is the proposal. We've delivered the website and the call center. It's just about getting Congress to help us with the agency. Cybersecurity, there were a few questions that came up before this session on cybersecurity, so I added some content here. We're doing a lot on cybersecurity, as you can imagine. It's sort of in everything we do. We don't make a purchase without thinking about cyber. We don't do cyber without thinking about other technology. And the thing you want to do here is, as you think about cybersecurity and information assurance and all that, is strike that careful balance between secure and convenient, and think about how do we balance those two things. The best way to make your home computer secure is unplug it from the internet, and that's not convenient when you're sitting there wanting to get access to something. And so there's sort of that, we have to strike that balance. And I think that the way we strike it is, one, is just being more consistent in the way we do cyber across the federal government. I launched a program in December called FedRAMP. That's a Federal Risk Authorization Management Program. And what this basically does is creates a consistent way of the federal government to acquire cloud services that offer a consistency around cybersecurity. So we have defined these security controls that all the providers, have to apply to, and then apply for, and then they get pre-authorized into the FedRAMP system, and then agencies can buy those services through this, and so it gives us that consistency. We're investing nearly $800 million in support of operations of the National Cybersecurity Division at DHS. Department of Homeland Security is running cyber centrally for government through our authorization of them doing so. Part of this is, and this is that's in the president's proposed budget to Congress for fiscal year 13, is the $770 million. Part of that 770 is $200 million for upgrading our continuous monitoring system to basically go the last mile on the agencies to make sure we have a consistent view both in the cloud and local for what's going on the network. And we have, all of the agencies have that today standalone. We don't have it coordinated across all the agencies, and so that's where this is going to come. That investment will be coming to bear. We do these, I mentioned TechStat and PortfolioStat. We've had this program on the books for a little while called CyberStat, which are these face-to-face, sort of evidence-based, prescribed, just like TechStat's programs, where we sit down with agencies and go through their cyber footprint on a regular basis. And then we've also added cybersecurity as this priority goal. We've had this act on the book called FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, for quite some time, that attempts to build consistency across the federal footprint for them to assess their cyber stance. What had typically happened was it was more of a look back than an innovate forward, and so we've supplemented FISMA with some of these priority goals, like continuous monitoring, trusted internet connections, HSPD 12, which is the secure access cards with the chip on them you stick in your computer to digitally sign and log into your computer. We've added those as all across agency priority goals, so they now at the secretary level of the agencies are held accountable to those goals, with FaceTime with the president. So it really gets their attention when you do it that way, and gets a lot of good activity happening. So we did that. And then the last thing I launched in this front is NSTIC, which is a national standard for trusted identity in cyberspace. And this is an effort to start to federate trust in identity across the federal government. And I'm also encouraging state and local entities to start to adopt this, as well as working with all the identity providers out there. This was a private-public partnership with OpenID and RSA and some other people to get this done. But getting Facebook and Twitter and other people that own a lot of identity for citizens engaged in this is something we're pursuing to discuss with them. So what I basically mandated is, one, if agencies are building anything where there's a login from a citizen, where a citizen logs in to, say, a tax website or something like that, they have to use this NSTIC protocol that we've defined for their identity. And then the second thing was that agencies, if they use NSTIC, agencies have to trust other agencies. And so if you take that credential and you verify that that person is Joe Smith, and you pass it from the Social Security Administration over to the IRS to do some transaction that involves both agencies, that transaction has to be trusted. And so we built mechanisms to mandate that. You know, we'll never get to online voting and other things as a country unless we excel in things like federated identity, and this is the beginning of that. So we're going to hopefully foster that as a phenomenon going forward. Then the last thing I'll talk about is these two programs I launched this year to evolve the way government delivers solutions. The first one I called Shared First, which is, I've given you a couple examples of those, where on the commodity side of computing, going in and just focusing on where do we have waste and duplication. The 21 email systems at Department of Agriculture, moving that to one, the 1,000 mobile contracts, the 18 PC buying contracts at the Department of Commerce, moving that to one. We have an opportunity on Shared First to save massive amounts of money and create investment capital to go fund other things in government. And so we've got to move afoot. Portfolio Stat is really kind of the delivery vehicle for that for me, that's going to look across those portfolios, and I can start to identify duplication and drive those to, you should only have one email system. Government should only have one payroll system, and we should act more like a private sector company there. And then the second part is move big to little, and this is on the mission delivery side. When you deliver software, the typical motion, and this I call Future First. The typical motion in government is that when you're faced with some problem you want to solve through technology, you'll go and typically get some smart people in a room and sort of scope out what you're going to deliver. Say you're doing a new version of Medicare, or you're doing some big service delivery, some HR system or something like that for your agency. You'll define it, kind of get the technical business specs written down. You'll go to Congress, ask them for money, and probably explain that this is like a 4 or 5 year project and it's going to cost $100 million and this and that. And if they give you approval, they'll give you funding for the first year. You then go back to your agency and run through the procurement process to hire a vendor to do this, typically a large systems integrator, and then you start down the road of building this thing in a waterfall development cycle, and start from point A and hopefully move to point Z and get all the steps in between delivered. But inevitably, and we have so many examples in government of this happening, leadership changes somewhere on year 2 or year 3. Appropriations Committee in Congress doesn't give you the funding you thought you were going to get in the next year, so your out-year calendar just gets blown up, and you move forward. Laws change underneath, or inevitably technology changes over the life cycle of these things, and by the end of the day, you get to like year 6 or 7, and the thing is so outdated, broken, not delivering any value. You maybe have a big 3-ring binder full of specs that you're really proud of, but it cost you $100 million to get that 3-ring binder, that you end up just throwing it out and either starting over or going back to some paper-based way of doing things that you've done before. Well, technology now exists that allows you to really break these things down into components and write components in discrete ways that allow them to be shared across projects, that allow them to be combined, that allow them to be delivered in a timely manner, that deliver value. And so we're starting to introduce notions of agile development, componentized development, and other things into government to try to change this and bring this new technology to bear. I was on the inception team and actually ended up launching Xbox, for example, the first Xbox at Microsoft. And when we were in those first discussions and going through what could we do from a gaming platform, it was unthinkable to go and think that we would just start from scratch, that we build the operating system for Xbox from nothing. We grabbed like the Windows core and this presentation thing and some internet technology. We sort of put it all together and wrote the integration code to pull all those segments, those pieces together, and built some custom stuff that was necessary for the platform, and shipped it out. Every version of Windows, all the versions of Office when I worked on those at Microsoft are all built in a componentized way. Back when I started at Microsoft, if you added a word to the spell checker in Microsoft Word, it wasn't replicated in Microsoft Excel. You had to add that same word in Excel. It wasn't shared across. Now that's all shared. Like 80-90% of that product is shared amongst the different components, and that's the mentality we need to get to. We don't have a mentality of sharing. The great thing is this is starting to happen. You're starting to see it in government. We're starting to build in this way. And I basically went to the appropriators in Congress, the people who authorize money to be spent, and said to them, the next time someone shows up and says, I've got the next great 5-year plan, send them to me before you talk to them, and I'll have a conversation with them about how to do this right. And so thinking about if you're in computer science and all this other stuff, as you go forward, bringing this methodology and mentality to government's a super powerful thing and something that we're going to do a lot of. So to close, the bottom line is, as you heard, I'm giving you little anecdotes of what you should be doing, but your country needs you in many ways. One is, just keep up the hard work in school if you're a student, I'm proof positive that a great education you get at Iowa State is going to lead to great things, and I've certainly had an amazing life adventure after I left here. And there are literal things you can do today if you're interested. One is challenge.gov. So we authorize through the president the ability for agencies of government to put up monetary prizes for solutions delivered to meet the needs of government. So on challenge.gov, you will find cool challenges that NASA has put up there, that other agencies of government have put up there, often with monetary prizes that say, come help us solve this problem. Whoever wins. I'm a judge on a Commerce Department one that's went live just a few weeks ago. So I encourage you to go up there and check it out. And there's even it's not all software development. There's actually like think through this problem or give us creative ideas here or there. So if you're not in there, think about citizen developing. Looking at data.gov. And the interfaces that allows. There's also a great nonprofit organization called Code for America that is doing that hires fellows into the Code for America program. They'll train you, and then they send you out into cities in the country to work with local municipalities on using government data to solve problems. There's a great effort going forth in Boston where they've got this sort of virtuous cycle with the Department of Public Works to fill potholes. You literally take like your smartphone, take a picture of a pothole, geotag it, upload it, and like the guy who fills it will send you a picture of it filled up afterwards. So it's really cool. So it's stuff like that. It's really, really neat stuff. Feedback and crowdsourcing. Look for opportunities to go up online with the federal government and give us your feedback. We do a lot of activities where we source from the crowd and get those up. We the People is a sort of request for feedback petition platform. WeThePeople.gov or WhiteHouse.gov/WeThePeople. Either one will get you there, and it is a platform for posting ideas, posting questions, posting things like that. That if you get enough votes, we'll get an official response from the White House. And then I mentioned the Presidential Technology Fellows Program, if you're interested in that, or the PMF program if you're in poli-sci or another discipline. We'll consider them all. So with that, that's all I had. But I'd love to take questions. Any questions? Raise your hand if so. Mom, do you have any questions?
I was wondering on your cloud computing, do you use the federal government to create the cloud, or are you using private business for the cloud?
A little of both. We're
Okay.
actually trying to promote the private sector more.
Okay.
Public sector is good. The model we typically adopt in government as it relates to our local data centers is running privatized local data centers. So it'd be you take your data center that you have today and you contract a company to come in and run it for you to bear the burden of the cost of electrical, maintenance, uptime, software, all that stuff, but run it from local infrastructure. We sort of do that model, and we do the outsource model to others. FedRAMP is going to, I think, really foster a lot of good good activity there, because the main problem we've had is lack of consistency on the cyber front
Right.
to deploy cloud computing, and FedRAMP's going to give us a consistent way to do that. So we're
Thank you.
excited about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Excuse me, the technology fellowship sounds like an excellent opportunity for our students. Can you tell us more about what they need to do to get hooked up to that? I'm sure there's more than just looking at the web page. So could you just fill us in with the details?
Yeah, so it's the main requirement is you fill out an application. There's quite a large application up on the website, and it does require a faculty member to write a letter of recommendation. You upload those two things into the system, and then it goes into sort of an offline mode where people comb through the applications. I think it's an upload of a resume, answer a questionnaire, and then the letter of recommendation. Comb through the applications, and then we'll do, I think, over the phone or Skyped interviews with you after that to vet you through the system. But it's pretty straightforward, much like a job application with the additional requirement of a letter of recommendation.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to go get on. I'm speaking to 5,000 people tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thank you for giving me the practice run on some of the concepts I'm going to talk about. So appreciate it. Thanks. Have a good one.